Good morning. I should introduce myself as we have some visitors. That's great. I'm Ian Wishart. I'm one of what we call our occasional preachers. And may I add my welcome to you if you're visiting today celebrate the baptisms of Felix and James. Hurrah! Good solid names, aren't they? Felix and James. There's been a trend in recent years to give children increasingly exotic names. I came across a young couple who had babies, two twin babies, and they decided to go for a combination of the exotic and the ordinary. So they had Fairy Buttercup and Dave. Now, it's all right when they're babies, isn't it? But when they grow up a bit, it's not going to be quite so good when they have to go to school and introduce themselves. I mean, Fairy Buttercup is not going to be best pleased, is she? And Dave, she's going to be furious. Anyway, where were we? Oh, yes, the Bible. Sanity prevails. And our readings today from this amazing collection of books feature two mountaintop experiences. One with Moses from the book of Exodus, written about 1500 BC, and the other from Matthew's Gospel, written in the 1st century AD, where we have the extraordinary occasion of what we know as the Transfiguration. And I'd like to present to you the M3 sermon, because we'll take a trip to look at the mystery, the magnificence, and the meaning for us of those events. Mystery, magnificence, meaning. M3. Just be grateful I didn't go for the M25. Baptism is what in Christian jargon we call a sacrament. The Church of England has two sacraments considered to be ordained by Jesus: baptism and communion. And both of these sacraments are considered to be the outward visible sign of an inward invisible grace. In the case of baptism, as Nick mentioned, we have the visible dousing with water, sometimes complete submersion in water. The boys got off lightly this morning. And this is the outward sign of the inward invisible grace of being baptized into, welcomed into God's family. And so it may seem a little mysterious. And indeed, the original Greek word for sacrament was mysterion. Oh, I've gone. There we go. But the mystery of baptism technology pales into insignificance compared with the events of the Transfiguration, doesn't it? We're quite late in Jesus' earthly ministry, and it is immediately preceded by Matthew's account of Peter's recognition that Jesus is the promised Messiah, and Jesus' first mention that he's going to be killed. And the events that followed are unique in the Bible and, frankly, astonishing. Be warned. Now, the eagle-eared among you may have noticed that both of our passages mention 6 days leading up to the big event. Moses waited for 6 days on the mountain before being called by God, and Jesus waits 6 days with his friends before leading them up the mountain. A tiny little detail which has symbolic meaning that we're not going to delve into now, but which is one of the many synchronicities in this Bible thing. In fact, by way of a quick, mysterious diversion, in 2007, a computer scientist and a Lutheran pastor prepared a comprehensive analysis of all of the connections and symmetries in the Bible. How many do you think they found? I'll put you out of your misery. The answer was 63,779. 63,000. And they represented that with this graphic. Given that the Bible is a collection of books written by 40 different people in three continents, in 3 different languages, over 1,500 years, that is, shall we say, somewhat mysterious and remarkable. There we go. It's beautiful, isn't it? The arcs of the connections within the Bible, and the colours of the lines represent how far apart they are in their telling. You might think that this would be impossible unless the whole thing were inspired by some great eternal power. Anyway, back on the M3 after the 6-day pause, Jesus leads Peter, James and John, the 3 uber disciples, up the mountain. And there Jesus is transformed, transfigured. His face shone like the sun. His clothes are dazzling white. And if you thought that was a bit weird, he's then joined by Elijah, who had mysteriously been swept up to heaven in his chariot of fire 800 years earlier, and by Moses, who had died 700 years before that. It's all quite extraordinary, with more than a hint of mystery for us to unpack as we continue our journey this morning. And then what of magnificence? Well, the story continues with Peter suggesting popping up some tents. We'll come back to that in a second. And our passage tells us, while he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." Another cross-reference, this time to Jesus' baptism, which may be familiar. And of course, it's the voice of God. And we know that not just because of what he says, but because God's presence has long been represented by a cloud. We might call it the glory cloud. A magnificent representation of the glory of God, of the presence of God. Now, to really understand the significance of what's happening here, we need to look back through the Old Testament to see the journey that the glory cloud has been on. You may remember that it was the cloud by day and the fire by night that led the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt and towards the promised land. And during that journey, we have our passage from Exodus that we had this morning, where the glory cloud settles on the mountain before God issues instructions to Moses. But we learn that the presence of the glory cloud has not been without its drawbacks. When God first issued Moses with the 10 Commandments, the cloud settled on the mountain, and God warns Moses that none of the people may so much as touch the mountain while the cloud covers it, or they will die. Later in the story of Exodus, God says to Moses, "You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." In the earliest book of the Bible, Job says to God, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself." The great prophet Isaiah had a vision of God, and faced with God's glory, even the mighty Isaiah says, "Woe to me, I am ruined." So you can see that repeatedly the Old Testament tells us that being confronted with the magnificent glory of God is all too much for us to bear. And why is that? Well, as we learn from events in the Garden of Eden, humankind distanced ourselves from God because we basically think that we know better, that we're in control. But in reality, we are flawed and finite, aren't we? And when confronted with the infinity and glory and holiness of God, we cannot bear the weight of his being. We can perhaps relate to this on a more trivial level. Like me, you may have had a bash at playing the drums, and after a while you think, "Yeah, I'm all right." But then you see James's dad, Andrew, playing it, and you think, "Well, I might as well just give up. I'll never be that good." And Andrew, I'm sure, has come across drummers whom he finds somewhat, shall we say, dispiriting. Or you may think you have pretty good general knowledge, but then come across others who clearly know way more than you do. I mean, I thought I was okay at general knowledge, but I recently watched University Challenge, and there was a question on there, and I confidently shouted out, "Henry VIII!" And the actual answer was nitrogen. It was quite dispiriting. Woe to me, I am ruined. In our Exodus passage, Moses, highly unusually, is invited inside the glory cloud where he stays for 40 days and 40 nights. And in that time, God reiterates the 10 Commandments. Moses had smashed the 2 tablets the first time round. But he also clearly discusses with Moses the problem, that the impact of the glory cloud. God effectively says, "I want to be with my people, but I don't want to kill them. They need protection." And so God sets out very precise instructions for the construction of this protection, a way in which God can dwell with his people without harming them. And that was to be called the tabernacle, a tent of meeting which would be carried around by the Israelites as they wandered through the wilderness. Now, as luck would have it, we may or may not have an early satellite image of the tabernacle. There we go. Didn't know they had such technology in those days. All of the detailed design instructions are included in 6 chapters of Exodus. The main outer perimeter, screened by curtains, the inner courtyard, and then within that, the tabernacle itself, the tented holy place. And within that, curtained off again, the most holy place, the Holy of Holies, where would be placed the Ark of the Covenant, a chest containing the 10 Commandments, and which would be the dwelling place of God. By the very end of the book of Exodus, the job is done. We read, then the cloud covered the tent of meeting. Moses could not enter the tent because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And then we skip forward 500 years to 996 BC and find the Israelites finally settled, for a time at least, in Jerusalem. And there King Solomon builds his famous temple, wherein they replicate the tabernacle, albeit exactly twice the size of the portable version. And in the first book of Kings, we get to another punctuation point in the Old Testament story. We read, the priests then brought the ark of the Lord's covenant to its place in the inner sanctuary of the temple, the most holy place. And the priests could not perform their services because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled his temple. God's unveiled presence remains too much to bear. And so it is in this context and with this incredibly rich background that we come back to the Transfiguration. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai, his face was described as radiant because he had been in the presence of God. Even that reflected radiance was such that he had to put a veil over his face to protect the people. But that was only a reflection, perhaps as the moon shines from the light of the sun. But here at the Transfiguration, we have Jesus' face shining like the sun itself. Incredibly, Peter, James, and John, and we get a fleeting, indisputable glimpse of Jesus' magnificent, divine nature. I mean, I'm not sure how much clearer the Bible could be about the true identity of this simple carpenter's son, Jesus of Nazareth. And however improbable it may seem, Jesus is talking with Moses and Elijah, who embody the law and the prophets, the bedrock, if you like, of the epic saga of the Old Testament. And so the whole cosmic, eternal tapestry, just for a moment, right here, is woven together. I mean, come on, this is good stuff, isn't it? 3 people nod. Anyway, with all that history and finding himself face to face with the magnificent appearance of the divine in Jesus, Peter understandably draws on his heritage and immediately suggests that they should hide Jesus, as well as Moses and Elijah, in 3 tents. The Greek word used is skenos, which is the same word used in the Greek translation of the Old Testament for tabernacle. And to make matters worse, as we read, the glory cloud, our old friend, appears, and the voice of God is heard. And understandably, the disciples fell face down on the ground, terrified. Of course they were terrified. No one may see me and live. They expected to die. But they didn't die. They didn't die. And when Jesus bids them get up, they open their eyes, they look up, and all they see is Jesus. Phew. So we've considered the mystery and the magnificence of these stunning events of this unique episode. But what is its meaning for us? As I mentioned, this all happened in the latter stages of Jesus' earthly ministry. On the way back down the mountain, Jesus once again refers to his death. And he says, what happened to John the Baptist will happen to me, which wasn't a happy ending. And of course, it's not long until Jesus and his companions enter Jerusalem for, in Jesus' case, the final time. And what happens there changes everything. In chapter 17 of John's Gospel, Jesus prays an amazing prayer just before they head off to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus will be arrested and dragged off to crucifixion. He prays for his disciples, and then he prays for all believers. That is, he prays for us. He says, Father, I pray for those who will believe in me through the message of the disciples, that all of them may be one. And then this remarkable statement, I have given them the glory that you gave me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, because the magnificent, radiant Jesus on that cross gave up his glory. My God, why have you forsaken me? If you picture Jesus on the cross, you see Jesus giving up his glory, losing his radiant beauty so that you can get it. As Jesus breathed his last, the curtain in the temple of Solomon that had been needed to provide protection for the unbearable presence of the glory of God was torn from top to bottom. In his death, Jesus removes the barrier of our sin by taking it all upon himself. He has made a way for us to come to the Father who loves us and who even today wants to be with us. Now, Jesus' ministry began with his own baptism in the River Jordan. And Paul writes in Romans chapter 6 that in baptism we are united with Christ. And that is what has mysteriously and magnificently happened to Felix and James this morning. Hallelujah. The start of a journey that Paul, in his second letter to the Christians in Corinth, puts like this. We all who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory are being transformed into his image with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. So the mystery, magnificence, and meaning of the Transfiguration. And finally, as we end our trip down the M3, 2 quick footnotes. Firstly, perhaps for you, coming to church is not something you normally do, and this whole Bible and Christianity thing is not something you've explored. I hope you've had a glimpse this morning of how rich and intriguing the Bible is. And it presents the magnificent story that I believe makes the greatest sense of our lives and the world around us. And that's perhaps why Bible sales in the UK have more than doubled over the past 5 years, surprisingly driven by the so-called young Generation Z in their hunger for spirituality and search for meaning. And second, I realise that for some of us at times, and perhaps right now this morning, all this talk of glory and transformation can seem far from reality. The road from baptism to transfiguration is not always easy and full of light. We may feel very untransfigured, ordinary and flawed. But be reassured. In the eyes of the disciples, the period after the Transfiguration was a dark time. It seemed there was to be no heroic ending. And yet there was glory at work. Even on the cross, there was glory at work. Because now we can gaze on the empty cross and see Jesus' glorious triumph over death. And even today, regardless of appearances, whatever the circumstances, there is glory at work. Praise the Lord. In Jesus, God's glory is no longer fatal. It enlivens us. Recognizing God's magnificence is no longer dispiriting. It is inspiring